A 4-year-old homeless girl sees a millionaire being branded on his back with a hot iron, but she picks up a piece of wood and does something that shocks everyone. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream sliced through the muggy afternoon air like a razor, echoing through the cobblestone streets of the historic district at precisely 3 o'clock. Winston Abernathy, the 52-year-old businessman, nearly spilled his coffee as he stepped away from the window of his luxury condo. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For the past 3 weeks, that sound had been coming from the weathered clapboard house across the street, a 2-story structure with peeling blue window frames that starkly contrasted with the modern elegance of his building. "Must be a kid throwing a tantrum," he muttered to himself, adjusting his tie before returning to his work. As the owner of one of the largest construction firms in the region, he was used to solving complex problems, but he preferred to stay away from other people's dramas, especially after 5 years living alone since he lost his wife in a rainy night. He preferred to forget. Across the street, inside the clapboard house, the 4-year-old girl, named Clementine, huddled in the corner of the kitchen, unable to understand why her aunt hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman, Lorelei, tightly held a metal spoon she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes red from the gin she'd been drinking since noon, fixed on the child trembling before her. "You're a curse on this house," Lorelei hissed, her voice slurred. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on Clementine's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars, dotting her thin limbs. Clementine bit her lip to keep from screaming louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her aunt further, who used to work at City Hall until she was fired for constant absenteeism caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's soft voice, singing that lullaby before bed. It was all that was left of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind in the most painful moments. "Stop sniveling," Lorelei grunted, putting the spoon in the drawer as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you smear the walls again with that filthy charcoal, you'll see what real punishment is." Clementine ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's lullaby, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. Winston stopped reviewing the contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His wife used to sing it when she cooked, a popular folk song about free birds. But where was it coming from? He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the clapboard house. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childish voice, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that struck a chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. In the house next to the clapboard house, the 61-year-old retired teacher, Eleanor, was watering her begonias when she heard the girl's song. Unlike Winston, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress, and that voice carried a pain that made her heart clench. How strange, she thought, observing the windows of the neighboring house, a family she had known for decades. Lorelei had always been troubled, but since she had taken custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the air of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other children in the historic district. Eleanor dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had talked properly with her, and perhaps it was time to get to know the little child better. Winston remained at the window, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. The music had stopped, but something in those few minutes had awakened memories that he preferred to keep dormant. Memories of his former employee who had resigned abruptly 5 years ago, a few months before the accident with his wife. The former employee was a gentlewoman, always humming while she organized the construction company's files. Then, suddenly, she had simply disappeared from his life, leaving only a formal resignation letter and many unanswered questions. He had never thought about her again until he heard that familiar song echoing from a house where a child seemed to be suffering in silence. The sun began to set over the mountains that surrounded the historic district when the girl finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her little fingers clutched the sheet, and in her dreams she flew like the bird she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the yard. Across the street, Winston closed the curtains and tried to return to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that perhaps it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. Night fell on the historic district, but the echo of that children's song continued to resonate in the mind of a man who had spent 5 years fleeing from his responsibilities, and a retired teacher who had never managed to ignore the suffering of a child. Neither of them knew yet that their lives were about to intertwine in unexpected ways, united by the fate of a 4-year-old girl whose cries had finally been heard. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical movement of the district awakening for another day. Eleanor put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that did not leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the Clapboard house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. Lorelei opened the door with a puffy face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. "Good morning," Eleanor said with her gentlest smile. "I came to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we talked properly." Lorelei hesitated, running her hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, Eleanor, It's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." Eleanor took a step forward, forcing Lorelei to back away. "And I would very much like to meet your niece. I hear she is an adorable girl." Lorelei's face hardened for an instant before forcing a sickly smile. "The child is sick. High fever. Better not to get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. Eleanor pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Perhaps I can help," the educator insisted. "I have experience with sick children. I raised 3 children. You know how it is." "No need." "No," Lorelei replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just a flu." "It'll pass soon." Eleanor noticed Lorelei's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol emanating from her even though it was so early. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades dealing with troubled families. Across the street, Winston watched the scene from his window while he had breakfast. He had woken up earlier than normal, disturbed by confused dreams where a child's voice mingled with memories of his former employee. When he saw Eleanor at the door of the Clapboard house, a strange curiosity invaded him. Eleanor finally said goodbye to Lorelei, but not without casting an investigative look into the interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her suspicions. Inside the clapboard house, Lorelei slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouched behind the table, trying to hide. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height did not allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" Lorelei growled, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty," Clementine mumbled, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" Lorelei laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the yard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." Clementine went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single mango tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found near the gas stove. They were always birds, small, large, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The hours passed slowly. Lorelei had locked the back door, leaving Clementine in the yard under the hot midday sun. The child began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to sing her mother's lullaby softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached Winston's ears again. This time, he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar about that voice, that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. While he was recording, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. His former employee used to hum that same song while she worked. She, who had been an exemplary employee until she disappeared abruptly. She, who always spoke fondly about her little daughter, a girl named Clementine. Winston murmured, his cell phone trembling in his hands. His former employee's daughter was named Clementine. The realization hit him like a punch in the stomach. The child who was suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the gentle woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made that connection before? Winston put his cell phone away and began to pace back and forth in his condo. He vaguely remembered his former employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with his wife, the problems at the company, that he hadn't paid due attention. Now, 5 years later, his former employee's daughter was across the street, and from the sounds coming from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt that Winston carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including the regret for not helping his employee when she clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock sharp, the screams started again. This time, Winston didn't step away from the window. He watched with growing horror as through the kitchen window of the clapboard house, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and started recording, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. Lorelei was holding something in her hands. It seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gesturing violently towards a small figure that he could barely distinguish. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time Winston couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. The question now was, what would he do with this information? That night, the girl slept on the floor of the yard, where Lorelei had left her as punishment for making noise during the afternoon. The child curled up in her own shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the mango tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent request to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her away from that place of pain. Across the street, Winston couldn't sleep. tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since his wife's passing. 3 days had passed since Winston discovered the child's identity, and guilt was consuming him like a slow fire. During these days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 o'clock, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, Eleanor made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the neighboring clapboard house. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting a new direct visit to Lorelei, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from which she had the best view of the backyard of the clapboard house. What she saw left her horrified. The girl was sitting under the mango tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn shirt and panties. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The child was drawing on the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that Eleanor recognized as birds. "My God," the educator whispered, her hands trembling as she held onto the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined. Much worse. The girl looked up and saw the old lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, the child smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved timidly. "Hi, Grandma," the girl said with her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly ladies. "Hi, my dear," Eleanor replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you okay?" The girl looked quickly towards the windows of the house before answering. "I'm fine. I'm just drawing birds." "That's beautiful. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," the child replied, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke Eleanor's heart. At that moment, Lorelei's rough voice echoed from inside the house, calling the girl. The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything that Eleanor needed to know. The girl got up quickly, wiped her hands on her shirt, and ran into the house, but not before looking once more at the professor with an expression that cried out for help. Eleanor remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to Lorelei's voice, everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend that she didn't know what was happening. Across the street, Winston had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could partially see the yard, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms made him sick. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a genuine fury burning in his chest. His former employee had trusted him in some way, even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time. She had left her daughter in the care of a family that lived in the same city where he lived. And now that child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. At 11 in the morning, Eleanor made a courageous decision. She put on her best formal outfit, picked up a tray of homemade sweets she had prepared as a pretext, and headed back to the clapboard house. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. Lorelei answered the door reluctantly, clearly irritated by the neighbor's insistence. "Eleanor, I already told you that it's not a good time." "Dear, I brought some sweets that I made yesterday," Eleanor interrupted firmly, "and I insist on getting to know the little child better. As old neighbors, it is our duty to support each other." Before Lorelei could protest, Eleanor had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of classroom teaching had given her. The interior of the clapboard house was dark and smelled of mold mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "The child is sleeping," Lorelei lied, blocking the way to the back of the house. What a shame. Maybe another time then, Eleanor said, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the gas stove, and above all, small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen. A muffled sob, almost imperceptible. Eleanor and Lorelei froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "Must be the neighbor's cat," Lorelei said quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. Eleanor smiled and nodded, but she had decided that she had already seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then, but remember that I'm always here next door if you need anything at all." Eleanor's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the educator left, Lorelei slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl huddled behind the gas stove, trying to hide. The child had cried when she heard the gentle voice of the professor, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," Lorelei accused, her eyes already shining with familiar fury. "No, Aunt, I didn't make noise," Clementine protested, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. Lorelei picked up the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly on the flame. The girl recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to draw attention, don't you?" Lorelei hissed as the spoon heated up. "You want the neighbors to come here asking questions? You think I don't know how to take care of you?" Across the street, Winston had positioned his cell phone at the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated worker who always spoke of her daughter with love. This child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. As Clementine suffered yet another episode of systematic torture, Winston made a call he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer and old college buddy, Franklin. "Franklin, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as the girl's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it could be a matter of life." That night, after Lorelei fell asleep drunk on the living room sofa, Clementine managed to slip silently into the yard. Her new burns throbbed, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the mango tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's lullaby. What she didn't know was that, for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering. And that, in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. Franklin arrived at Winston's condo on Friday morning with a grave expression on his face. The two men had been classmates in college almost 3 decades ago, and Franklin knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. Therefore, the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," Franklin said, sitting in the spacious living room of the condo. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." Winston poured coffee and positioned himself near the window, the spot that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She's being mistreated by the aunt who takes care of her." "Mistreated how?" Franklin asked, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." Winston paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, evidence of what's happening." Franklin was silent for a moment, processing the information. "This is very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." "I know," Winston replied, running his hands over his face, "but there's something more. My former employee worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly 5 years ago, a few months before the accident with my wife. I never understood why, but now you feel responsible, Franklin completed, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. Winston nodded. If I had paid more attention at the time, maybe I could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have had to leave her daughter with that woman. At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and Franklin could see the expression of anguish on his friend's face. "This happens every day?" he asked, horrified. "At 3 o'clock religiously?" "But sometimes at other times too," Winston replied, picking up his cell phone. "Want to see the recordings?" Franklin watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a specialist in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something in the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. "We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I will contact Child Protective Services and the District Attorney's Office. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the two men planned the intervention, across the street, Clementine was living another day of terror. Lorelei had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more gin in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that Clementine had made on the kitchen wall during the early morning. "How many times do I have to tell you not to soil the walls?" Lorelei screamed, holding Clementine by the arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're a plague, a curse on this house." Clementine tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother, and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. "You're going to be locked in the room until I decide what to do with you," Lorelei continued, pushing the child down the hallway. "And if I hear a noise, you'll experience a punishment you've never experienced before." The room where Clementine was locked was small and stuffy, with only a high window that she couldn't reach. There, she curled up in the corner and began to sing her mother's lullaby softly, the melody being her only source of comfort in a world that seemed to have forgotten that she existed. It was this song that Eleanor heard as she passed the house on her way to the market. The educator had spent the entire night thinking about the conversation with the girl in the yard, the marks she had seen on the child's arms, the atmosphere of fear that permeated that house. Eleanor stopped in front of the gate and listened. The girl's voice was weak but full of a sadness that made the educator's heart break. At that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the market, Eleanor went directly to the city centre, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. She knew the counsellor well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children. "I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," Eleanor said, entering the office without ceremony. The counsellor looked up from the papers she was analysing. "Eleanor, it's good to see you. What brings you here today?" "A child in danger, my neighbour. I'm sure she's being mistreated." The counsellor straightened in her chair, her expression immediately becoming serious. During her 5 years as a Child Protective Services counsellor, she had learned to recognise when a complaint was serious, and Eleanor was not the type of person to make frivolous accusations. "Tell me everything," the counsellor said, picking up a complaint form. While Eleanor reported her observations across town, Franklin was in a similar meeting in the office of the district attorney. The prosecutor listened carefully as Franklin presented the evidence collected by Winston. "This is compelling evidence," the prosecutor said, examining the videos on Franklin's cell phone. "I will order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will that take?" Franklin asked, worried. "With this evidence, we can act today," the prosecutor replied. "I will contact Child Protective Services now." Thus it was that by a coincidence that would change Clementine's fate, Two simultaneous complaints reached Child Protective Services on the same morning. The counsellor was finishing writing down Eleanor's account when her phone rang. Child Protective Services speaking. This is the district attorney. I need you to make an urgent intervention in a house on Main Street. We have evidence of serious child abuse. The counsellor paused, her pen suspended over the paper. Is that number 127 by any chance? Yellow clapboard house? Exactly. How did you know? I just received a complaint about the same house, the counsellor replied, looking at Eleanor in surprise. Two independent sources. This confirms the seriousness of the situation. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being assembled. The counsellor, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading towards Main Street. Eleanor had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. Winston watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Franklin was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. You did the right thing, Franklin said, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. I hope it's not too late, Winston replied, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the clapboard house. In the house, Lorelei had gone out to buy gin, leaving Clementine locked in the stuffy room. The child continued to sing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When the counsellor knocked on the door of the clapboard house and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside surpassed even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in every room. It was Eleanor who first heard the weak voice coming from the room in the back. "Someone's here," she said, guiding the team down the hallway. When they opened the door of the room and found Clementine curled up in the corner, singing her sad lullaby, everyone present felt a pang in their heart. The child raised her big, scared eyes, not understanding who those people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, honey," the counselor said, crouching down to be at the child's height. "My name is Bethany. We're here to help you." The girl looked at Eleanor, recognizing the kind old lady who had talked to her in the yard. A flicker of hope shone in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by fear. "Aunt Lorelei will be angry," she whispered. "You don't need to worry about that now," Eleanor said, reaching out to the child. "We're going to get out of here, okay?" And so, after 8 months of silent suffering, the girl was finally removed from the house where she had known only pain and fear, beginning a journey that would lead her back to the light she had lost when her mother departed from this world. The girl's departure from the clapboard house was a moment that would be engraved in the memory of everyone present. The child firmly held Eleanor's hand, her steps small and hesitant as she crossed the door that had been her prison for so many months. Her big eyes scanned the streets of the city as if she was seeing the world for the first time. "Where are we going, Grandma?" Clementine asked, using again the affectionate term she had given to the teacher. "To a safe place, my dear," the educator replied, squeezing the child's little hand gently. "A place where no one will hurt you ever again." The counselor coordinated the operation efficiently, but her heart broke as she observed the physical and emotional state of the girl. The child was visibly malnourished, her clothes were inadequate and dirty, and the burn marks on her arms told a story of systematic suffering that no child should know. Across the street, Winston watched the scene through his window, a mixture of relief and anxiety consuming his chest. Finally, after days of torturous inaction, he had managed to do something concrete. But now a new concern haunted him. What would happen to the girl from here on out? Franklin, who remained by his side, noticed his friend's tension. "The important thing is that she's safe now. We'll solve the rest step by step." "But where are they going to take her?" Winston asked, seeing the small procession moving away down the cobblestone street. "Probably to a foster family while they investigate the case. It's standard procedure." At that moment, Eleanor turned and looked directly at the window where Winston was watching. Their eyes met for an instant, and the educator made a discreet nod, as if she knew that he had been a fundamental part of that rescue operation. Meanwhile, in the bar where she used to drink, Lorelei finished her third shot of gin when she saw unusual movement on her street through the blurred window of the establishment. Her blood ran cold as she recognized official uniforms and people who clearly did not belong to that quiet neighborhood. "What the hell is going on there?" she murmured, rising unsteadily from the table. The owner of the bar followed her gaze. "Looks like the authorities are at your house." "You're not in trouble with the law, are you?" Lorelei did not answer. She threw some coins on the table and ran out of the bar, stumbling on the uneven stones of the sidewalk. Her heart was beating erratically, not only from the alcohol, but from the growing terror that her acts had finally been discovered. When she arrived at her house, she found the door open and two social workers making detailed notes about the conditions of the property. The counselor was waiting for her in the living room, her expression serious and professional. "What are you doing in my house? Where is the girl?" Lorelei tried to appear indignant, but her voice trembled visibly. "The child is under state protection," the counselor replied firmly. "We have received serious reports of mistreatment, and we have substantial evidence of child abuse." "That's a lie. I take good care of my niece." "Who made these false accusations?" The counselor showed her the official documents. "Ma'am, the child has multiple lesions consistent with intentional burns, as well as obvious signs of malnutrition and neglect. We have recordings of the episodes of violence and witnesses who witnessed the girl's suffering." Lorelei paled. "Recordings? Witnesses?" She looked instinctively at the kitchen window, realizing for the first time that it was visible from the building across the street. She had always tortured the girl in that location without worrying about who might be watching. "She's a difficult child." She tried to justify herself, but her words sounded weak even to herself. "Sometimes I had to be firmer, but I never hurt her on purpose. Ma'am, the situation is very serious. The child will be temporarily placed in alternative care while the case is investigated. You will have the right to a lawyer, and you can contest the accusations through the appropriate legal channels." Meanwhile, the girl was being taken for an emergency medical consultation at the small town hospital. The local pediatrician was shocked to examine the child. In his 20 years of profession, he had seen cases of child abuse, but the systematization of the lesions on that girl was particularly disturbing. "These burns are all intentional," he explained to the counselor after the examination. "They all have the same pattern, suggesting repeated use of the same heated object. Furthermore, the child is significantly underweight for her age." "How long will she need to recover physically?" the counselor asked. "The burns will heal with proper care, but the psychological trauma, that will take much longer." The girl, wearing clean hospital pajamas, was sitting on a bed in the pediatrics ward, observing everything around her with a mixture of fear and fascination. It was the first time in months that she had been in a truly clean and safe environment. Eleanor had remained with her throughout the medical examination, offering herself as a figure of family support. "Grandma, can I stay with you?" Clementine asked, holding Eleanor's hand. "We'll see what's possible, my dear," the educator replied, moved by the trust that the child placed in her. The counselor, observing the interaction between the two, began to form an idea. Eleanor was a respected person in the community, with experience in early childhood education, and clearly the girl felt safe with her. Perhaps there was a solution that did not involve further separating the child from someone she already considered family. That afternoon, while the girl rested in the hospital under medical care, an important meeting was taking place in the Office of Child Protective Services. The counselor, Eleanor Franklin, and, to everyone's surprise, Winston, were gathered to discuss the child's immediate future. "Sir, I understand that you knew the girl's mother," the counselor said, consulting her notes. "She worked for my company for 3 years. Winston confirmed, his voice full of emotion. She was an exemplary employee and a dedicated mother. If I had known what was happening with her daughter— The important thing is that now we know, Eleanor interrupted. The question is, what do we do from now on? This child needs stability, love, and specialized care. The counselor turned to Eleanor. Ma'am, would you be willing to become a temporary foster family for the girl, considering that she has already established a bond with you? Eleanor did not hesitate. Of course. I have experience with children, my house is suitable, and, well, I think the girl and I have already chosen each other. Franklin spoke up. My client would like to contribute financially to the child's care. He feels responsible, considering his connection with the girl's mother. Winston nodded. I want to ensure that she has access to the best medical and psychological care available. I would also like to get to know her better, if that is appropriate. I feel I owe it to her mother's memory. The counselor made careful notes. We will proceed as follows. The girl will temporarily stay with Eleanor while we do a complete assessment of the family situation. You will be able to contribute to the costs and, if you wish, establish a gradual relationship with the child, always supervised and focused on her well-being. When the meeting ended, Winston felt relieved to finally have a concrete way to help. But he was also nervous about the prospect of personally meeting his former employee's daughter. What kind of connection could they form? That night, the girl slept in a clean and safe bed for the first time in 8 months. In the guest room of Eleanor's house, surrounded by borrowed stuffed animals and covered with a warm blanket, she finally managed to rest without fear. Her last thoughts before falling asleep were about birds. No longer the trapped birds she drew on the walls of her aunt's house, but free birds flying high in the blue sky. The girl's first week at Eleanor's house was a period of delicate discoveries and gradual healing. The child woke up every morning at 6 o'clock, the time she used to be awakened by her aunt with screams, and lay still in bed, waiting for the first sign of violence. When she realized that there was only silence and the aroma of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen, a shy relief took over her little heart. Eleanor, with her decades of experience dealing with traumatized children, knew that recovery would be slow. She established a gentle routine: breakfast at the kitchen table, illuminated by the sun, then free time in the flower-filled yard, and always, always, a lot of patience with the sudden silences and tremors that still plagued the girl. "Good morning, my little flower," Eleanor said every morning, using a gentle tone that made the girl's eyes fill with tears. Not of sadness, but of an emotion that she had almost forgotten existed. On the third day, something extraordinary happened. Clementine was in Eleanor's yard, watching a hummingbird visiting the red flowers in the garden, when she began to hum her mother's lullaby softly. But this time, for the first time in months, her voice wasn't choked with fear. Eleanor, who was watering the plants nearby, stopped to listen. It was a beautiful melody, full of longing but also of hope. When Clementine finished, she looked at the educator with an almost surprised expression at herself. "My mom used to sing that song," she said, her voice still weak but firmer than before. "She was a mother who loved you very much," Eleanor replied, crouching next to the child. "And I'm sure she would be very happy to know that you are safe now." It was at that moment that Winston appeared at the gate. He had been gathering courage to make that visit for 3 days, always finding an excuse to postpone it. Franklin had scheduled the meeting with Eleanor, explaining that it would be important for the girl's healing process to meet people who had loved her mother. Clementine hid behind Eleanor when she saw the tall, well-dressed man approaching. Winston stopped a few feet away, noticing the fear in the child's eyes. "Hi," he said softly, crouching down to be closer to her height. "My name is— well, you can call me Uncle. I knew your mommy." Clementine's eyes widened. It had been so long since anyone had talked about her mother that she had begun to wonder if her memories were real or just dreams. "You knew my mom," she asked, timidly stepping out from behind Eleanor. Yes, I knew her. She worked with me, and she always spoke of you with great affection. She said you were the most important thing in her life. Clementine processed this information in silence for a few moments. Then, to everyone's surprise, she took a step towards Winston. She sang a song to me, she said. Grandma said she loved me very much. Your mother loved you more than anything in the world, Winston confirmed, feeling an intense emotion rise in his throat. And she would be very proud to see how brave you are. Over the following weeks, Winston began to visit Clementine regularly, always accompanied by Eleanor and always respecting the child's pace. He gradually became a familiar and comforting presence in her new life. It was during one of these visits that something happened that changed everything. Clementine was playing in the yard with some toys that Winston had brought, not expensive or extravagant toys, but simple things like crayons and paper which she used to draw her favorite birds. Uncle, she said. She had started calling him that spontaneously. Can you tell me more things about my mom? Winston sat on the ground next to her, something he had never imagined doing before. Sure. Your mother was very smart. She organized all the important papers in my company and never made mistakes. Was she pretty? Clementine asked, drawing what appeared to be a woman next to a bird. She was very pretty, and she had a smile just like yours when you're happy. Clementine smiled, and Winston realized that it was the first time he had seen that child truly happy. The smile illuminated her entire face, transforming her completely. Uncle, can you be my daddy now? She asked suddenly, with the cruel innocence that only children possess. The question hit Winston like lightning. He looked at Eleanor, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes, and then at Clementine, who was staring at him with a hope so pure that it made his heart break and mend at the same time. My dear, he began, choosing his words carefully, I can't be your daddy because you already had a daddy who loved you very much. But I can be someone who takes care of you, who protects you, and who will always be here when you need me. Clementine considered this for a moment. Like a real uncle? Exactly like a real uncle. That night, after Clementine fell asleep, Eleanor and Winston talked at length on the porch of the house. The educator had noticed the transformation not only in the child, but also in Winston. He had traded his formal suits for more casual clothes during the visits. His laughter had become more frequent, and she could see that taking care of the girl was healing something deep inside him. She's recovering well, Eleanor said, but she still has nightmares some nights. She wakes up crying and calling for her mother. It's understandable, Winston replied. She's been through so much trauma. Do you think we should seek specialized psychological help? I'm already arranging that. I know an excellent child psychologist in the neighboring town. She can come here a few times a week. I'll pay all the costs, Winston said immediately. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you feel so responsible for this girl? I know you knew her mother, but there's something more, isn't there? Winston was silent for a long time, looking at the stars that shone over the city. Finally he spoke. When my former employee resigned, I was going through a very difficult period in my marriage. My wife and I argued constantly. I was focused only on my own problems. She tried to talk to me a few times. She seemed worried about something. But I was so absorbed in my own issues that I didn't pay attention. He paused, his voice choked with emotion. If I had been a better boss, a better human being, maybe she would have felt comfortable telling me about her difficulties. Maybe I could have helped, prevented her from needing to leave her daughter with her sister. You can't blame yourself for that, Eleanor said softly. I can, and I'll carry that guilt forever. But now I have a chance to do something right. To honor her memory by taking care of her daughter. That night Winston made a decision that would change not only his life, but also the girl's future. He would seek out Franklin the next morning to discuss the possibility of becoming officially responsible for the child, along with Eleanor. Meanwhile, in the guest room, Clementine slept peacefully for the first time in her life. In her dreams, She flew with the birds she drew, but now she didn't fly to escape. She flew for pure joy, knowing that there were people who loved her waiting when she returned home. 2 weeks after the conversation on the porch, Clementine had transformed into an almost unrecognizable child. Her hair, once always dirty and tangled, now shone under Eleanor's loving care. Her cheeks had gained color, her eyes had regained the natural sparkle of childhood, and she had begun to talk more, sharing small stories and asking curious questions about the world around her. On that Tuesday morning, something unexpected happened. Clementine was drawing at the kitchen table when she asked Eleanor, "Grandma, why did Aunt Lorelei hurt me?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. She had prepared for this moment, talking to the child psychologist about how to address the trauma when Clementine was ready to talk about it. "My dear," Eleanor said, sitting next to the child, "some adult people get very sad and angry with life, and sometimes they hurt other people, especially little children like you, but that didn't happen because you did anything wrong." "I did something wrong, yes," Clementine insisted, her voice getting small. "Aunt Lorelei always said I was a plague, that because of me, Mommy went away." Eleanor felt her heart clench. "Look at me," she said, gently holding the child's face. "Your Mommy didn't go away because of you. Your Mommy loved you more than anything in the world, and you were never, never a plague. You are a blessing." At that moment the doorbell rang. It was Winston arriving for his daily visit. When he entered the kitchen and saw Clementine with red eyes, he immediately worried. "What happened?" he asked, crouching next to her chair. "Clementine was telling me about her feelings," Eleanor explained. Clementine looked at Winston with a serious expression beyond her 4 years. "Uncle, Lorelei said that I killed my mother. Is it true?" The question was like a punch in Winston's stomach. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength to answer as gently as possible. "Listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you," he began, his voice firm but caring. "Your mother passed away because she got sick, very sick. It had nothing to do with you, and wherever she is now, she is proud of the brave girl that you are." "But if I hadn't been born, wouldn't she have gotten sick?" Clementine insisted. "If you hadn't been born, your mother would never have known true happiness," Winston replied. "She told me that you were the light of her life, the reason why she smiled every day." Clementine processed these words in silence. Then something unexpected happened. She got up from her chair and hugged Winston, a tight and desperate hug from a child who had finally found a safe harbor. "I like you, Uncle," she murmured against his chest. "I like you very much too," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. That afternoon, while Clementine played in the yard, Eleanor and Winston received an unexpected visit. Bethany arrived with a worried expression on her face. "We need to talk," she said, sitting in the living room. "I received news about Lorelei." "What happened?" Eleanor asked, immediately alert. "She is contesting the removal of the girl from her custody. She got a lawyer and is claiming that the accusations are unfounded, that she was the victim of a conspiracy of neighbors." Winston stood up abruptly. "That's impossible. We have recordings, medical evidence, witnesses." "I know," Bethany said, trying to calm him down. "And our evidence is solid, but the legal process could extend for months. During that period, there is a possibility that a judge will order supervised visits." The idea of Clementine having to see Lorelei again made Eleanor's blood run cold. "She can't be exposed to that. She's barely started to recover." "There's something else," Bethany continued. "Lorelei's lawyer is questioning the suitability of the current arrangement. They are arguing that the girl should be in a traditional family, not with a single and retired lady." "That's ridiculous," Winston protested. "Eleanor has provided Clementine with more love and care in 2 weeks than she received in 8 months with Lorelei." "I completely agree," Bethany said, "but we need to prepare for this legal battle. You need a strong lawyer." "My lawyer is excellent," Winston said immediately. "He will represent us." It was at that moment that Clementine ran into the room, interrupting the adults' serious conversation. She was holding a drawing she had made in the yard. "Look," she said, showing the paper. "I drew our family." The drawing showed three figures: a woman with grey hair who clearly represented Eleanor, a tall man who was Winston, and between them, a little girl smiling. Everyone was holding hands, and there were colourful birds flying around them. Bethany observed the drawing with professional interest. "Can you tell me about your drawing?" "It's Grandma, Uncle and me," Clementine explained. "We are a family, and the birds are happy because nobody hurts them." "And where are you in the drawing?" Bethany asked. "In the middle," Clementine replied as if it were obvious. "Because they take care of me from both sides." After Bethany left, Winston stayed at Eleanor's house until late, the two adults discussing strategies to protect Clementine from a possible prolonged legal battle. "There's something I need to tell you," Winston said finally. "I talked to Franklin about the possibility of adoption." Eleanor raised her eyes, surprised. "Adoption?" "A joint adoption," he explained. "Both of us, as a permanent foster family. My lawyer said that such cases are rare but possible, especially considering the unique circumstances of the situation. It would mean that we would become legally responsible for Clementine forever. She would have a stable home, resources for education and health, and above all, people who love her unconditionally." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, processing the proposal. "And are you sure that's what you want? Raising a child is not something temporary. It's a lifelong commitment." "I'm absolutely sure," he replied without hesitation. "This girl has already changed my life in ways I never imagined were possible. She has given me a purpose that I had lost a long time ago." "And if her mother didn't approve?" Eleanor asked. Winston thought carefully before answering. "I think she would want her daughter to be raised by people who love her. And I believe she would know that we are doing this out of love, not out of guilt or obligation." That night, after Clementine fell asleep, Eleanor went into the room to check if she was okay. The child was sleeping peacefully, hugging a teddy bear that Winston had brought. On her bedside table was the drawing of the family she had made, as if it were her most precious treasure. "My little warrior," Eleanor whispered, adjusting the blanket. "You don't know it yet, but you have two people willing to move mountains to protect you." Across town, in his condo, Winston looked out of the same window from which he had observed the girl's suffering months ago. But now, instead of guilt and paralysis, he felt determination and hope. No matter what Lorelei and her lawyer tried to do, he and Eleanor would fight with all their strength to ensure that Clementine never knew fear and pain again. The battle for official custody was just beginning, but she had already won something much more important: a family that truly loved her. The next day, Franklin called with news that changed everything. He had discovered information about Lorelei that could be decisive in the case, information that would reveal a past much darker than anyone imagined. The legal battle began 3 weeks later, and with it came a discovery that no one expected. Franklin had spent days investigating Lorelei's history when he found information that completely changed the course of the case. In his office, he presented his findings to Winston and Eleanor with a grave expression. "You need to know what I discovered about Lorelei," Franklin said, spreading documents on the table. "She's not just a woman with alcohol problems. There's something much more serious here." "What do you mean?" Winston asked, flipping through the papers. Lorelei was fired from City Hall not only for absences, but for suspected embezzlement of funds intended for children's social programs. She was never formally charged because the evidence mysteriously disappeared. But the internal records show an ongoing investigation. Eleanor paled. "She stole money intended for children?" "Apparently, yes. And there's more," Franklin continued. "I found medical records that show that the girl's mother was hospitalized several times in the months before her departure, always with injuries that doctors considered suspicious, but she never wanted to talk about how they happened." A heavy silence took over the room. Winston got up and walked to the window, processing the information. Are you saying that Lorelei also abused the girl's mother? It's very likely, and that would explain why she left town so abruptly. She wasn't just running from financial problems, she was running from her own sister. Eleanor covered her face with her hands. My God, and she left her daughter with that woman. Why? She probably had no choice, Franklin replied. The mother was sick, she had no resources, she had nowhere to go. Lorelei must have taken advantage of her sister's desperate situation. At that moment, the office door opened and Bethany entered with an urgent expression on her face. I'm glad you're all here. I have important news. What happened? Winston asked. Lorelei was arrested last night, public intoxication and assault on a merchant in the city center. But that's not all. Bethany paused, taking a deep breath. During the arrest, she made some disturbing statements about the girl. What kind of statements? Eleanor asked, fearing the answer. She said that the child deserved everything she received, and that if she could, she would do worse. The sheriff considered the statements as additional evidence that she is not fit to take care of a child. Franklin perked up. That's excellent for our case. I will use these statements as evidence that Lorelei represents a continuing danger to the girl. There's something else, Bethany continued. Lorelei's lawyer abandoned the case. Apparently she couldn't pay the fees and, well, the statements she made didn't help her cause. While the adults discussed legal issues, Clementine was living her happiest days since she could remember. That morning, she had helped Eleanor make sugar cookies, her little hands covered in flour, as she laughed at something the educator had said. It was a sound that Winston never tired of hearing, the pure and crystalline laughter of a truly happy child. "Uncle!" Clementine shouted when she saw him arrive for lunch. "I made cookies for you." "Really? And how did you know I was hungry?" he joked, picking her up. "Because you always get hungry when you come here," she replied, giggling. During lunch, Clementine excitedly told about her day, about the bird she had seen in the yard, about the storybook that Eleanor had read to her. It was hard to believe that that vibrant and talkative child was the same silent and terrified girl they had rescued weeks ago. "Honey," Winston said carefully, "Grandma and I want to talk to you about something important." "What is it?" she asked, stopping eating. "Would you like to stay living with Grandma forever? And I would continue visiting every day, taking care of you, being your real uncle?" Clementine's eyes widened. "Forever? Really?" "Forever," Eleanor confirmed, holding the child's little hand. "If you want to, of course. And Aunt Lorelei?" Winston and Eleanor exchanged a look. They had decided to be honest with the girl, within the limits appropriate for her age. "Lorelei can no longer take care of you," Eleanor explained gently. "She needs help to solve her problems first." Clementine was quiet for a moment, processing the information. Then, to the adult's surprise, she smiled, a huge and radiant smile. "So I can stay with you forever? And no one will ever hurt me again?" "Never again," Winston promised, his voice firm. "I promise you will always be safe with us." Clementine rose from her chair and embraced Eleanor first, then Winston Abernathy. "I love you both," she said, words that profoundly moved the two adults. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Clementine was playing in the backyard when she noticed a strange man standing on the sidewalk, watching the house. She ran inside, seeking Eleanor. "Grandma, there's a man outside staring at us," she said, visibly frightened. Eleanor went to the window and saw a middle-aged man, thin and shabbily dressed, standing across the street. Something about his posture made her uneasy. "Sweetheart, go to your room and play, okay?" she said, picking up the phone. Eleanor immediately called Winston Abernathy, who was on his way to a meeting. "There's a strange man watching the house." Clementine scared. "I'm heading there now," he replied, mentally cancelling all his appointments for the day. When Winston Abernathy arrived, the man was still there. He got out of the car and walked directly to the stranger. "Can I help you with something?" Winston Abernathy asked, his tone polite but firm. The man turned, revealing a face etched with the marks of alcohol and a hostile expression. "You must be the big shot who's bankrolling all this," he said with disdain. "Who are you?" Winston Abernathy asked, keeping his distance but remaining alert. "I'm Lorelei's cousin, Waylon, and I came to see where the girl who ruined my cousin's life is." "The girl didn't ruin anyone's life," Winston Abernathy replied, feeling anger rise in his chest. "And I suggest you leave immediately." "Oh yeah? And who's going to make me? You think because you have money you can do whatever you want?" At that moment, Eleanor came out of the house with the phone in her hand. "I've already called the police," she announced. "They're on their way." Waylon spat on the ground and stepped back, but not before casting a threatening look at the house. "This isn't over," he muttered before disappearing down the street. When the police arrived, they took their statements and promised to keep a watch on the area, but the incident left everyone shaken, especially because it showed that Lorelei's family hadn't accepted the situation. That night, Clementine had her first nightmare in 2 weeks. She woke up crying, calling for Eleanor. When Eleanor rushed to her room, she found the child trembling under the covers. "It was just a bad dream, my dear," Eleanor comforted, hugging her. "I dreamed that Lorelei came back to get me," Clementine sobbed. "That will never happen," Eleanor promised. "We won't let it." "Do you really promise?" "I promise with all my heart." But as she comforted Clementine, Eleanor couldn't help but worry. Waylon's appearance had shown that the battle for Clementine was far from over, and she knew they would do anything to protect that child, even if it meant facing a war. The next day, Franklin brought more news. He had discovered something in the old City Hall records that could finally put an end to Lorelei's claims on Clementine, something that would reveal the true extent of her cruelty. The following days brought a constant tension that hung over Eleanor's house like a dark cloud. Waylon had returned twice more, always keeping enough distance to avoid being considered trespassing, but clearly intimidating. Winston Abernathy had hired a discreet security guard to watch the area, but the sense of threat remained. Clementine, with her heightened childhood sensitivity from past trauma, sensed that something was wrong. Her smiles became less frequent, and she began to cling more to Eleanor, especially when they left the house. "Grandma, why does that man keep looking at our house?" she asked one morning, while they were having breakfast. Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Some people get confused when other people are happy, my dear, but you don't need to worry. We're taking care of everything. Is Uncle Winston Abernathy taking care too? Of course he is. We're both always taking care of you." That afternoon, while Clementine played in the backyard under Eleanor's watchful eyes, Winston Abernathy arrived with Franklin and a woman she didn't know. The woman was elegant, middle-aged, with a gentle but professional smile. "Sweetheart," Winston Abernathy called, "come and meet someone special. This is the judge. She's here to talk to us about our plans." Clementine approached timidly. She had learned to trust the people Winston Abernathy and Eleanor introduced her to, but she still maintained a natural caution with strangers. "Hi," the judge said, crouching down to be at the child's height. "Can I ask you a few questions?" "You can," Clementine replied, looking at Eleanor for encouragement. "Do you like living here with Grandma?" "I like it a lot. She makes me sugar cookies and reads me stories." "And what do you think of Uncle Winston Abernathy?" "He's very good. He brought me toys and always plays with me, and he knew my mom." The judge smiled. "Do you feel safe here?" "I do. Nobody hurts me here." The conversation continued for a few minutes, with simple questions that allowed the judge to assess Clementine's emotional well-being and her adjustment to her new home. When she finished, she joined the adults in the living room for a more serious conversation. "From my preliminary assessment," the judge said, "the girl is visibly well-adjusted and happy in this environment. The attorney has shown me all the evidence in the case, and I believe you have a solid basis for the adoption process." "How long will this take?" Winston Abernathy asked. "Normally, Cases like this take between 6 months and a year, but considering the special circumstances and the documented history of abuse, I can expedite the process." Eleanor sighed with relief. "What about Lorelei's cousin, Waylon? Can he try something?" "He has a minor but significant criminal record," the judge replied, "mostly related to alcohol. I don't believe he has a legal basis to contest, but I will issue a preventive restraining order." That night, after Clementine fell asleep, Winston Abernathy stayed for dinner with Eleanor. It was something that had become routine in recent weeks, the two discussing the child's care, planning her future, and gradually developing a partnership that went beyond shared responsibility. "Can I ask you something personal?" Eleanor said, as they washed the dishes together. "Sure. Do you miss the life you had before? The freedom, the tranquility?" Winston Abernathy thought for a moment. "You know, I thought I had a full life before. Work, assets, comfort. But now I realize I was just existing. This girl gave me a purpose I didn't even know I needed." "And you're not afraid of all this responsibility?" "I am," he admitted. "But it's a different kind of fear than I felt before. Before I was afraid to get involved, to commit, to suffer again. Now I'm afraid of not being good enough for her, of failing when she needs me." "That means you've already committed," Eleanor observed with a smile. 2 days later, the situation took an unexpected turn. Clementine was playing in the backyard when she saw Waylon approaching the gate again. This time, however, he wasn't just watching. He was clearly heading to the house. "Grandma!" Clementine shouted, running inside. "The bad man is coming!" Eleanor immediately called the security guard Winston Abernathy had hired, but Waylon was already banging on the door. "Open this door!" he shouted. "I want to talk to you." "Go away," Eleanor replied through the locked door. "You have a restraining order. I'm not leaving until we talk. That girl belongs to our family." Clementine was trembling behind Eleanor when they heard the sound of glass breaking. Waylon had broken a side window of the house and was trying to get in. It was at that moment that Winston Abernathy arrived, having been alerted by the security guard. He found Waylon half inside the house, yelling about family rights and threatening to take Clementine by force. "Get out of this house now," Winston Abernathy ordered, positioning himself between Waylon and Clementine. "Your house? This is the house of the girl who destroyed my family. The only person who destroyed anything here was Lorelei, torturing an innocent child." Waylon lunged toward Winston Abernathy, but at that moment the security guard and 2 police officers arrived simultaneously. The situation was quickly controlled, with Waylon being arrested for trespassing and violating a court order. But the damage was done. Clementine had witnessed another scene of violence, and all the progress of recent weeks seemed threatened. She curled up in the corner of the room, trembling and crying, refusing to talk to anyone. "Sweetheart," Eleanor tried, approaching slowly. "It's okay now. The bad man is gone." "He'll come back," Clementine sobbed. "They always come back, like Lorelei always came back." Winston Abernathy knelt beside her. "Look at me. This man won't bother you anymore. I promise." "You can't promise that," she said, her voice small but laden with a painful wisdom. "Nobody can." It was a moment of brutal clarity for both adults. They realized that despite all the love and care they offered, Clementine would forever carry the scars of the trauma she had experienced. Healing would be a long process, with relapses and challenges they hadn't even imagined yet. That night, the child psychologist paid an emergency visit. After talking with Clementine for an hour, she met with Winston Abernathy and Eleanor. "Today's incident was a powerful trigger," she explained. "Clementine relived the fear and helplessness she felt with Lorelei. It will take some time for her to feel safe again." "What can we do?" Eleanor asked, visibly shaken. "Keep doing what you're doing. Love, patience, consistency, and maybe it's time to consider moving." Winston Abernathy looked up. "Moving? This house, as welcoming as it is still too close to the places where Clementine suffered." A move to a completely new environment could help her build genuinely safe memories. That night, after Clementine finally fell asleep in Eleanor's room, she had refused to sleep alone. The two adults talked late into the night about this possibility. "Would you sell this house?" Winston Abernathy asked. "If it's best for Clementine, yes," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "This house is just a place. Our family's what matters." "Our family," Winston Abernathy repeated, liking the sound of the words. "Then let's look for a new home, a place where she can grow up without shadows of the past." It was a decision that would change everything once again, but both knew they would make any sacrifice to ensure that Clementine had the happy and safe childhood she deserved. The next day, Franklin called with surprising news. Lorelei had officially given up contesting custody. She was in a rehab clinic and, according to her new public defender, recognized that she was not fit to care for a child. The path to adoption was finally free of legal obstacles. The search for a new home became a joint project that brought renewed energy to the family that was forming. Winston Abernathy had suggested buying a larger property on the outskirts of town, where Clementine could have more space to play and they would be away from the painful memories of the historic district. "I want you to see some options," he said to Eleanor one morning, spreading real estate flyers on the kitchen table. "I found some houses with large gardens, perfect for a child." Clementine, who was having breakfast, became interested in the colorful images. "Uncle Winston Abernathy, are we going to live in a new house?" "If you want to, yes. A house where you can have your own room, a big yard to play in, and where no one from the past can bother us." Clementine's eyes sparkled with cautious curiosity. "Can I choose the color of my room?" "You can choose everything," Eleanor replied, hugging the child. "Wall colors, furniture, toys. It will be your special corner." The following weekend, the three went to see the houses that Winston Abernathy had pre-selected. The first was too big, cold, and impersonal. The second had a beautiful garden, but it was too close to Main Street. It was in the third house that something magical happened. It was a two-story house painted light yellow with white trim, surrounded by a flower garden where colorful butterflies danced among the flowers. It had a wide porch in the front, and in the back, a spacious yard with a centuries-old tree that offered generous shade. "Wow," Clementine whispered as they got out of the car. "It's like the houses in my drawings." The realtor, a friendly lady, opened the door and invited them in. The interior was welcoming, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. It had 3 bedrooms upstairs, a large living room, a spacious kitchen, and, to Clementine's delight, a small library with built-in bookshelves. "Can I live here now?" Clementine asked, running from room to room with an excitement she hadn't shown in a long time. "If you like it," Winston Abernathy replied, watching with emotion as the child explored every corner of the house. "I like it. I like it a lot," she exclaimed, stopping in front of a window overlooking the garden. "Look how many birds!" Indeed, there were several birds in the garden, mockingbirds, robins, sparrows, creating a natural symphony that enchanted everyone. Eleanor approached Winston Abernathy. "This is the right house," she said softly. "You can feel the positive energy of the place." "I can," he agreed. "I'll make an offer today." 3 weeks later, as the purchase papers were being finalized, something unexpected happened. Franklin called Winston Abernathy urgently on a Thursday morning. "I need you to come to my office immediately. Bring Eleanor too. It's about Clementine." "What happened?" Winston Abernathy asked, his heart racing. "I prefer to explain in person. And maybe it's better to leave Clementine with someone you trust today." Eleanor left Clementine with a dear neighbor who always helped when needed, and followed Winston Abernathy to Franklin's office. When they arrived, they found Bethany also present with a serious expression on her face. "What's going on?" Eleanor asked, feeling a chill in her stomach. Franklin took a deep breath. "We received information about Clementine's mother." "What kind of information?" Winston Abernathy asked. The mother didn't. She didn't pass away as we thought, Bethany said carefully. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor and Winston Abernathy looked at each other, slowly processing what they had just heard. How is that possible? Eleanor murmured. She's alive, Franklin said directly. Clementine's mother is alive and has been in a psychiatric clinic in the state capital for 5 years. The revelation hit them like a tsunami. Winston Abernathy stood up abruptly, walking to the window, while Eleanor covered her face with her hands. This is impossible, Winston Abernathy said. Clementine told us that her mother that she had passed. That's what Lorelei told the child, Bethany explained. The mother had a severe nervous breakdown after the constant abuse from her sister. She tried to hurt herself and was admitted for treatment. Lorelei took custody, claiming that her sister was incapacitated. And she never got better? Eleanor asked, tears in her eyes. She's getting better now, Franklin said. Doctors say she's been asking about her daughter constantly in recent months. The treatment is working. My God, Winston Abernathy whispered. And now, what does this mean for Clementine? It means, Bethany said carefully, that the mother has legal rights to the child. If she is deemed fit by the doctors... No, Eleanor said firmly. Clementine has barely begun to recover. She has bonded with us. She can't be torn from all this again. I understand your concern, Bethany said. But we have to consider what is best for Clementine in the long term. A child has the right to be with her biological mother. Franklin spoke up. There are legal precedents for situations like this. We can argue that the sudden change would be detrimental to the child's emotional well-being. What about the mother? Winston Abernathy asked. Does she know we found her daughter? Not yet, Bethany replied. We wanted to talk to you first. But she will have to be informed soon. Winston Abernathy returned to his chair, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. How are we going to tell this to Clementine? Very carefully, Bethany said. Maybe we should consult the psychologist first. That afternoon, an emergency meeting was scheduled with the child psychologist. The professional listened to the whole situation carefully, taking notes while processing the implications. This is an extremely delicate situation, she said. Clementine genuinely believes that her mother passed away. Discovering that this is not true will be a huge shock. How should we approach this? Eleanor asked. Gradually. First, we need to prepare Clementine for the possibility of changes. Then introduce the idea that her mother may be alive. And finally, if it is inevitable, prepare for a possible reunion. What if the mother wants her daughter back immediately? Winston Abernathy asked. Then we will have to fight in court, the psychologist replied. But based on what I observed, Clementine is in a stable and loving environment. Any drastic change could be devastating for her emotional development. That night, Winston Abernathy and Eleanor returned home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Clementine was waiting for them with a drawing she had made at the neighbor's house, the new yellow house with 3 happy figures in front, her, Eleanor, and Winston Abernathy. Look what I drew, she said excitedly. Our new family in the new house. Eleanor hugged the child extra hard, trying not to cry. It's beautiful, my dear. When are we moving? Clementine asked. Soon, Winston Abernathy replied, his voice laden with an emotion he struggled to control. Very soon. That night, after Clementine fell asleep, Winston Abernathy and Eleanor talked late into the night about the impossible situation they found themselves in. I can't lose her, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. She has become my daughter in heart. Neither can I, Winston Abernathy replied, but if the mother wants her daughter back, then we will fight, Eleanor said with determination. We will fight for Clementine, for the family we have built. She deserves stability, not another traumatic twist in her life. It was a battle that neither had foreseen, but both knew they would do anything to protect the child who had changed their lives forever. The future was uncertain, But one thing was clear: they would not give up without a fight. The week following the revelation about Clementine's mother was one of the most difficult Winston Abernathy and Eleanor had ever faced. Both struggled to maintain a normal facade in front of Clementine, but the child, with her heightened sensitivity, sensed that something was different. "Grandma, why are you sad?" she asked one morning as Eleanor tried to focus on making breakfast. "I'm not sad, my dear. I'm just thinking about some grown-up things," Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. "Is it about our new house? Do you not want to move any more?" "Of course I do. We're going to be very happy in the new house." But internally, Eleanor wondered if they really would go to the new house, or if the life they had built together was about to crumble. That afternoon, the psychologist paid a visit to start gradually preparing Clementine for the possible changes. She sat with the child in the backyard, where they usually had their most important conversations. "Do you remember your mom?" the psychologist asked gently. "Of course, I remember. She used to sing to me and make me cookies," Clementine replied, her eyes sparkling with happy memories. "And do you remember when she left?" Clementine's face clouded over. "Lorelei said she went to heaven because of me." Sometimes grown-ups tell things that aren't true. Your mom didn't leave because of you, and maybe she didn't go to heaven. Clementine's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes when people get very sad or sick, they need to go to special places where other people take care of them until they get better. Like the hospital where I went when Lorelei hurt me." "Similar to that, yes." Clementine was silent for a long time, processing this new and confusing information. "Are you saying my mom might be alive?" The psychologist took a deep breath. "It's a possibility, yes." Tears began to stream down Clementine's face, not from sadness, but from a complex emotion that mixed hope, confusion, and fear. "But if she's alive, why didn't she come to get me? Why did she let Lorelei hurt me?" "Because she was very sick, my dear. Sometimes when people are mentally ill, they can't take care of themselves, much less other people." That night, Clementine barely managed to sleep. She ran to Eleanor's room several times, full of questions that Eleanor struggled to answer appropriately. "Grandma, if my mom is alive, will she want to take me away from you?" The question Eleanor feared most had finally arrived. She hugged Clementine tightly, trying to convey a security she herself didn't feel. "We don't know yet, my dear. But what I can promise you is that we will always fight for what is best for you." "I don't want to leave," Clementine said, her voice small but determined. "You are my family now." "And we always will be," Eleanor promised, even though she didn't know if she could keep that promise. 2 days later, Franklin brought news that changed everything again. Clementine's mother had been informed about her daughter's situation and was insisting on seeing her immediately. "The doctors say she is stable enough for a supervised visit," Franklin explained during an urgent meeting. "Legally, we can't deny her that right." "But Clementine has barely begun to process the information that her mother may be alive," Winston Abernathy protested. "A meeting now would be too traumatic." "I agree," said Bethany, "but the mother is threatening to file a lawsuit if we don't allow the meeting. And unfortunately, she has legal rights over her daughter." The psychologist spoke up. "If the meeting is inevitable, then at least let's do it in the most controlled way possible. Neutral environment, limited duration, and with all of us present to support Clementine." It was decided that the meeting would take place in the psychologist's office the following Saturday. The mother would be brought from the clinic accompanied by a nurse and a psychiatrist, while Clementine would have the support of Eleanor, Winston Abernathy, and Bethany. During the days leading up to the meeting, Clementine oscillated between excitement and terror. She would draw pictures of a woman she called Mom, then hide under the bed crying. "What if she doesn't like me anymore?" she asked one night. "What if she thinks I grew up ugly?" "Your mom will think you're the most beautiful child in the world," Winston Abernathy replied, even though he himself was terrified of the possibilities of that meeting. On Saturday morning, Clementine woke up earlier than normal. She had chosen her prettiest dress, a yellow one with flowers that Eleanor had bought for her, and asked Eleanor to braid her hair. "I want to look pretty for Mom," she said, looking in the mirror with a mixture of anxiety and hope. The psychologist's office had been specially prepared for the meeting. Toys and books were scattered around the room to create a more relaxed atmosphere, and chairs had been arranged in a way that would not intimidate either the mother or the daughter. When the mother arrived, Winston Abernathy was shocked by her appearance. The woman he remembered as a cheerful and efficient employee had become a frail figure, too thin, with graying hair and eyes that reflected years of suffering. But when she saw Clementine, her expression transformed completely. "My little one," the mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My beautiful girl." Clementine hid behind Eleanor, watching the woman who was her mother, but also a stranger. The 4-year-old child she remembered had grown, changed, bonded with other people. "Hi, Mom," Clementine said timidly. "You've grown so much," the mother said, controlling the urge to run and hug her daughter. "You're so pretty, so healthy." Gradually, with the psychologist's careful mediation, mother and daughter began to talk. The mother said that she had been sick, that she thought of her daughter every day, that she deeply regretted having left the child with her sister. "I didn't know she was going to hurt you," the mother said, her voice breaking with tears. "If I had known, I never would have." "It's okay, Mom," Clementine said, her childlike compassion speaking louder than any pain. "Now I'm safe with Grandma and Uncle Winston Abernathy." It was at that moment that the reality of the situation hit the mother. Her daughter had created a new family, people who clearly loved and cared for her. She looked at Eleanor and Winston Abernathy, seeing the genuine love in their eyes when they looked at Clementine. "You took good care of her," the mother said, addressing them. "I can see that she is loved." "Very loved," Eleanor confirmed, her voice choked with emotion. The meeting lasted 2 hours, long enough for mother and daughter to reconnect minimally, but not so long that it was overwhelming for either of them. When it was time for the mother to leave, she knelt in front of Clementine. "My dear, Mum needs to go back to the place where she is healing, but I will think of you every day." "Are you going to get better?" Clementine asked. "I'm going to try very hard. And when I'm completely well, we'll talk about our future, okay?" Clementine nodded, hugging her mother for the first time in 5 years. It was a brief hug, still hesitant, but full of possibilities. After the mother left, Clementine was quiet for a long time. Finally, she looked at Eleanor and Winston Abernathy. "She seems sad," Clementine said, "but I still want to stay with you." That night, while Clementine slept exhausted from the emotional meeting, Winston Abernathy and Eleanor received a call that would change everything once again. It was the psychologist with news about a conversation she had with the mother after the meeting. "The mother made a decision," the psychologist said, "a decision that you need to hear." The psychologist's call left Winston Abernathy and Eleanor in suspense for an entire night. The professional had asked to meet them the next day for an important conversation about the mother's decision, but had not given details over the phone. On Sunday morning, the two headed to the office while Clementine stayed once again with the trusted neighbor. The child had woken up talking about the meeting with her mother, mixing joy at having seen her with relief at still being with her chosen family. "She's still sad," Clementine had commented during breakfast, "but I think she wants to get better." In the office, the psychologist greeted them with a serious but not somber expression. There was something in her eyes that suggested the news would not be devastating. "The mother spent the night talking to me and the doctors at the clinic," she began. "The meeting with her daughter was a turning point for her." "Turning point in what way?" Eleanor asked, clenching her hands nervously. She realized that Clementine had built a new life, a family that truly loves her, and more importantly, she understood that forcing a change now would be harmful to her daughter. Winston Abernathy leaned forward. What exactly did she decide? The mother will not claim immediate custody of Clementine, the psychologist said. She recognizes that she is not yet completely healed and that her daughter needs stability. The relief that washed over Eleanor was so intense that she began to cry. Winston Abernathy held her hand, struggling against his own emotion. But there are conditions, the psychologist continued. The mother wants to maintain regular contact with her daughter while she continues her treatment. She also wants to participate in important decisions about the child's education and future. That's fair, Winston Abernathy said immediately. She is the biological mother. She has that right. And when she's completely healed, Eleanor asked, still worried about the future. The mother was very clear about that, the psychologist replied. She said that if one day she is completely well, she would like to have her daughter back, but not abruptly. It would be a gradual transition, only if it were best for the child. And how did Clementine react to that possibility? Winston Abernathy asked. We haven't talked to her about that yet. I thought it was best to hear your opinion first. Eleanor wiped away her tears. The important thing is that she is safe with us for now. And if one day the mother is really well, we'll face that situation when it comes. There's something else, the psychologist said. The mother made a special request. She would like you to consider moving closer to the state capital to facilitate visits. Winston Abernathy and Eleanor looked at each other. They had just bought the yellow house on the outskirts of town, but if it meant keeping Clementine and giving the mother the chance to gradually reconnect with her daughter, we can consider that, Winston Abernathy said. My company can open an office in the capital, and Eleanor can work as an educational consultant anywhere. When they returned home, they found Clementine playing in the yard with the neighbor, drawing more birds on a large sheet of paper. Hi, Grandma! Hi, Uncle Winston Abernathy! She shouted, running to hug them. I drew Mom along with you. The drawing showed 4 figures now, Eleanor, Winston Abernathy, Clementine, and a long-haired woman who represented the mother. All were smiling, surrounded by the inevitable colourful birds. It's beautiful, my dear, Eleanor said. Did you enjoy seeing your mom yesterday? I did, but she was very thin. I think she needs to eat Grandma's cookies to get strong. Clementine's innocence deeply touched the 2 adults. Even at 4 years old, she intuitively understood that her mother needed care. That afternoon, the psychologist came to have dinner with them. She had become almost part of the family in recent weeks. During the meal, she carefully explained to Clementine that her mother would like to see her more often, but that she would continue to live with Eleanor and Winston Abernathy. Can I see Mom again? Clementine asked, excited. You can, yes. Maybe once a week, while she gets better. And will she like my drawings? I'm sure she will. 2 weeks later, a new routine was established. Every Saturday, Clementine visited her mother at the clinic, always accompanied by Eleanor or Winston Abernathy. The meetings were initially supervised, but gradually became more natural. The mother was visibly improving. She had gained weight, her hair was more styled, and above all, there was a new light in her eyes. Seeing her daughter happy and safe seemed to be the best medicine for her recovery. She's becoming a beautiful girl, the mother said to Eleanor during one of those visits. Thank you for taking such good care of her. There's no need to thank me, Eleanor replied. Clementine has become the daughter I never had. It was during one of these conversations that the mother made a revelation that surprised everyone. There's something you need to know about Clementine's father, she said, looking nervously at Winston Abernathy. Winston Abernathy felt his heart race. What do you mean? He worked at your company too. He was an engineer in the technical department. Winston Abernathy remembered immediately. The engineer had been an excellent employee who had left the company around the same time as Clementine's mother, claiming to have received a better offer in another state. He's Clementine's father? He asked, still processing the information. He is, but he doesn't know. When I found out I was pregnant, he had already left. I tried to contact him, but I never could. Why didn't you ever tell me this when you worked with me? Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job, afraid of judgment. And when he left, well, I thought it was better to raise the daughter alone. This revelation brought a new dimension to the story. Clementine had a living father somewhere, a man who didn't even know of her existence. "Would you like us to try to find this man?" Winston Abernathy asked. The mother thought for a long moment. "Maybe. When I'm completely well, maybe it's time for Clementine to meet her father too." That night, back at Eleanor's house, Winston Abernathy and Eleanor talked about this new revelation while Clementine slept peacefully. "Our family may get even bigger," Eleanor commented. "Are you afraid of that?" Winston Abernathy asked. "A little," she admitted. "But if it's best for Clementine, we'll face it together." It was then that Winston Abernathy made a decision that had been brewing for weeks. "There's something I want to ask you." "What is it?" "Will you marry me?" The question caught Eleanor completely off guard. They had become life partners, united by the love they shared for Clementine, but marriage had never been discussed. It's not just for Clementine," he hastened to explain, "although she has brought us closer. It's because I've discovered that you are the most generous, courageous, and loving person I have ever met, and I can't imagine my life without you." Eleanor looked at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and changed everything. He had gone from a distant neighbor to a partner, from a stranger to family. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." The next morning, Clementine woke up to find the two most important adults in her life with mysterious smiles on their faces. "We have a surprise for you," Eleanor said. "Uncle Winston Abernathy and I are going to get married. That means he's going to be your heart daddy officially." Clementine was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then her face lit up with the most radiant smile they had ever seen. "Are we going to be a real family?" she asked. "We already are," Winston Abernathy replied, picking her up. "Now we're just going to make it official." At that moment, looking out the kitchen window at the street where it had all begun, Winston Abernathy thought about how life has a mysterious way of fixing broken things and creating beauty from pain. A girl he had heard screaming in pain was now laughing in his arms, surrounded by love and hope. The months that followed brought a stability that none of the three had experienced before. The wedding of Winston Abernathy and Eleanor was a simple and intimate ceremony in the city church, with Clementine as the bridesmaid, wearing a pink dress she had chosen personally. "Now we're a real family on paper too," Clementine said during the party, holding the hands of the two adults who had become her heart parents. The move to the Yellow House finally happened, and Clementine adapted to the new home with an ease that surprised even the psychologist. Her room was painted light blue, with drawings of birds on the walls. No longer the sad black birds she drew at Lorelei's, but colourful and cheerful birds that represented her new life. The weekly visits to the mother became a natural part of the family routine. With each meeting, Clementine and her biological mother got to know each other a little better, gradually building a relationship that respected both the past and the present. Biological Mom, as Clementine had begun to call her to differentiate her from Eleanor, who was simply Mom. "You're getting stronger," the child commented during a visit. "I am, my dear. And it's because you give me the strength to get better," replied the mother, who had truly transformed. Her hair had returned to its natural shine, she had gained healthy weight, and above all, she had regained the serenity that Winston Abernathy remembered from when she worked for him. It was during one of these visits that the mother made an announcement that would change the family dynamics once again. "The doctors said I can be discharged from the clinic next month," she said, carefully observing everyone's reactions. The silence that followed was filled with complex emotions. Clementine, Now, with 5 months of life in the Yellow House and developing a surprising understanding of complex emotional situations for her age, immediately realized the implications. "Does that mean you can come visit us at our house?" she asked. "It means exactly that," the mother replied with a smile. "If your parents agree, of course." "Of course we agree," Winston Abernathy said immediately. "You will always be welcome. And perhaps," the mother continued hesitantly, "we can start talking about that matter we discussed before." Everyone knew she was referring to Clementine's father. In recent months, Franklin had done some discreet investigations and discovered that the engineer was living on the coast, working for a construction company, and, according to the information collected, single and without children. "Are you sure you want to contact him?" Eleanor asked. "I think Clementine has the right to know her father," the mother replied, "but only if you agree. You are her parents now, and I respect that completely." Clementine, who was listening to everything carefully, asked the question everyone was expecting. "If I meet my blood daddy, will you still be my parents?" "Forever," Winston Abernathy promised, hugging her. "Nothing and no one can change that." 2 weeks later, an unusual meeting took place in the Yellow House. Clementine's biological father had accepted the invitation to meet the daughter he didn't know he had, and now sat nervously in the living room, looking at the child with a mixture of awe and emotion. "She has your eyes," commented the mother, who had been released from the clinic the day before and was making her first visit to her daughter's new home. The father, a 35-year-old man with a tired but kind appearance, watched Clementine with fascination. "I can't believe I have a daughter," he murmured. "Want to see my drawings?" Clementine asked, naturally using the straightforward manner she had learned from Eleanor. "Of course I do," he replied, clearly moved. During the following hours, a new family dynamic began to form. The father proved to be genuinely interested in getting to know Clementine and in being part of her life, but also respectful of Winston Abernathy and Eleanor's role. "You saved my daughter," he said to the couple, "and you gave her something I could never have given, a stable and loving family. I'm eternally grateful." "She saved us too," Eleanor replied. "Clementine taught us what unconditional love is." It was decided that the father would visit Clementine once a month and that they would gradually try to build a father-daughter relationship that complemented, not competed with, the bonds she had already formed. "Now I have 4 parents," Clementine joked one night as Eleanor tucked her into bed. "Daddy, Mom, biological Mom, and biological Dad. And we all love you very much," Eleanor replied, kissing the child's forehead. The following month, something extraordinary happened. Lorelei, who had spent the last few months in treatment for alcoholism, asked to meet Clementine. The initial request was denied by all the responsible adults, but the psychologist suggested that perhaps it would be therapeutic for both of them. "Not to reconnect," she explained, "but so that Clementine can confront her past from a position of strength and security." The meeting was carefully organized, with all the parents present and with a limited duration. Lorelei, visibly transformed by the treatment, begged Clementine for forgiveness with tears in her eyes. "I was very sick," she said, "and I hurt you in ways that should never have happened. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I regret everything." Clementine, now more mature and secure, looked at the woman who had once been her source of terror. "Lorelei, you hurt me a lot, but now I'm happy and safe. I know, and I'm happy that you have found people who truly love you." The meeting was brief, but it brought a sense of closure that helped Clementine to move on completely. 6 months later, life in the Yellow House had found a perfect rhythm. Clementine attended the local school, where she was one of the most beloved students, always drawing colorful birds and telling about her big and loving family. The biological mother had moved to a small apartment in the state capital and worked part-time as a secretary, visiting her daughter every week. The biological father came once a month, always bringing carefully chosen gifts and stories about his work. "You know what impresses me the most?" the psychologist said during one of her regular visits, watching Clementine play in the garden. "How she managed to integrate all these relationships without confusion or conflict. She simply accepted that she can have many people who love her. Children are wiser than adults sometimes," Winston Abernathy commented, watching his heart-daughter teach a song to the real birds that visited the yard. Eleanor smiled, thinking about how her life had changed completely. From a lonely retired teacher, she had become a mother, a wife, and the center of an unconventional but deeply loving family. Who would have thought that a 4-year-old girl who suffered in silence would change so many lives, she commented. "Didn't only change our lives," Winston Abernathy replied. "She taught us that family isn't about blood or conventions. It's about love, protection, and choice." At that moment, Clementine ran to them holding a new drawing. A yellow house surrounded by colorful birds, with 6 figures holding hands in front. Her, Eleanor, Winston Abernathy, the biological mother, the biological father, and, in a recent addition, the psychologist. "Look," she said proudly, "my complete family." And it really was. A family built not by chance or tradition, but by choice, love, and the determination of adults who decided that a child deserved all the happiness in the world. The journey had been long and painful, but looking at that smiling girl surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, everyone knew that every tear, every fear, every battle had been worth it. A year later, on the eve of Clementine's 6th birthday, an unexpected discovery brought the perfect closure to a story that had begun with so much suffering. Eleanor was organizing some old papers in the office when she found a dusty box that had belonged to the previous owner of the yellow house. "Honey, come see this," she called, carefully opening the box. Inside, there were old photographs of the house and a sealed letter dated 5 years ago. The letter was addressed to whoever took care of that house next, and was signed by a lady who had lived there before them. "Whoever finds this letter," Winston Abernathy read aloud, "should know that this house was built to shelter love and healing. For 50 years, I raised here 4 children who were not born of my womb, but of my heart. Children who arrived wounded by life and left healed by love. This house has a special energy for that. If you are here, you are probably also taking care of someone who needs healing. The house will help you, as it has helped me all these years." Eleanor covered her mouth with her hands, moved. "She also welcomed wounded children. And we didn't even know," Winston Abernathy murmured. "It's like the house chose us." At that moment, Clementine ran into the office, all dirty with dirt from the garden where she played with the birds that were now practically domesticated from so much she talked to them. "What are you looking at?" she asked, curious. "A letter from a lady who lived here before," Eleanor explained. "She also took care of special children like you." "Like me. Children who needed a lot of love to get well," Winston Abernathy said, hugging her. "Oh," Clementine said naturally. "That's why I felt at home here from the first day." The simplicity of Clementine's answer deeply touched the 2 adults. At 6 years old, she possessed a wisdom and a capacity for forgiveness that continued to impress everyone around her. The next day, during Clementine's birthday party, the whole unconventional family was gathered in the garden of the yellow house. The biological mother had brought a homemade cake, the first time in years that she felt well enough to cook. The biological father had traveled especially from the coast, bringing a gift he had made personally, a birdhouse he had built in his workshop. "For your bird friends," he said, installing the birdhouse in Clementine's favorite tree. The psychologist was there too, no longer as a therapist, but as a friend of the family that had become. Bethany had brought her little daughter to play with Clementine, and even Franklin was present with his wife. "I want to make a toast," Winston Abernathy said, raising his glass of orange juice. "Clementine had insisted that everyone drink the same thing." to a special girl who taught us that family isn't about perfection, but about unconditional love. And to all of you, said the biological mother, her voice firm and clear, who saved my daughter when I couldn't do it. We didn't save anyone, Eleanor corrected. Clementine saved us all. She showed us how to love unconditionally, how to forgive without resentment, and how to build something beautiful from pain. Clementine, who was at the center of all this attention, smiled her radiant smile and made her own toast with the small cup. I want to thank you, she said in her clear voice, for having so many people who love me, and for having learned that even when bad things happen, good things can always appear afterwards. At that moment, as if it had been arranged, a flock of mockingbirds landed in the tree where the new birdhouse was, singing a cheerful melody that sounded like a celebration. Look, Clementine exclaimed, even the birds are singing happy birthday. Later, when the guests were gone and Clementine finally fell asleep, exhausted but happy, Winston, Abernathy and Eleanor sat on the porch of the yellow house, watching the stars. Can you believe it's only been a year and a half since we heard her first cries? Winston Abernathy asked. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, Eleanor replied. And sometimes it feels like it was yesterday. Do you have any regrets? About how our life has changed completely, Eleanor thought for a moment. My only regret is not having acted sooner. I imagine how many times she cried alone before we finally heard her. But we heard, Winston Abernathy said, and that's what matters. That night, Clementine woke up with a dream, not a nightmare, as she used to have in the first months, but a beautiful dream, where she flew with the birds over an entire city full of yellow houses where children were loved and protected. She got out of bed and walked to her parents' room, finding them sleeping peacefully. For a moment, she watched them, thinking about how they were different from all the other people who had taken care of her. Then she went back to her room and picked up her sketchbook. In the light of the lamp, she drew her family once more, but this time she included something new. In the drawing, all the figures had small wings, as if they were angels taking care of each other. And in the corner of the sheet, she wrote with her still childish handwriting, "My family who helped me fly." 6 months later, on a sunny spring morning, Clementine made a statement that perfectly summarized her journey of healing. "Mom," she said to Eleanor as she helped water the flowers in the garden, "I had a life before that was very sad, but now I have a life that is very happy. And I think the sad life made me know how to value the happy life more." Eleanor stopped watering the plants and looked at that extraordinary girl who had transformed not only her life, but the life of so many people. "You are very wise for a 6-year-old girl," she said. "It's because I went through hard things," Clementine replied naturally. "But now I know that I can go through anything, because I will always have you." At that moment, Winston Abernathy arrived from work earlier, something that had become routine since Clementine entered their lives, and found his 2 favorite women in the garden, surrounded by butterflies and birds, laughing at something the child had just said. It was a scene of perfect peace, an image he would keep forever, the family he hadn't planned, but that had become the most important thing in his existence. "What are you doing?" he asked, using the affectionate nickname he had created for them. "Talking about how good it is to be happy," Clementine replied, running to hug him. "And how good it is to have a real family," Eleanor added. As the 3 hugged in the garden of the yellow house, the birds sang in the trees, the flowers swayed in the gentle breeze, and somewhere in the sky, a story of suffering had definitively transformed into a story of love, redemption, and hope. Clementine had flown away from the pain, but not alone. She had taken with her all those who chose to love her, and together they had discovered that even the most difficult beginnings can have the most beautiful endings. The child who once drew trapped and sad birds now drew free and colorful birds, And in that simple transformation was contained all the magic of a family that chose each other, of a love that healed deep wounds, and of a hope that proved to be stronger than any pain. In the yellow house, surrounded by flower gardens, an unconventional but deeply united family continued to write their love story, one happy day at a time. And when Clementine looked back at those dark days that seemed so distant now, she knew that every tear she'd had watered the seeds of the happiness that now flourished in her heart. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories are born from the most improbable places, and the strongest families are those built not by blood, but by choice, courage, and unconditional love. And that was their story. A story of how a 4-year-old girl who suffered in silence found her voice, her wings, and especially found a home where she could finally be just a happy, loved, and protected child, exactly as she always deserved to be. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a score of 0 to 10, and thank you very much.